Hey guys, welcome back to CheatSheetPros.com. Today is video day, so the first of 3 videos we're going to do is over the prize picks and player props. I feel much better this week. Last week I had a horrible head cold, so apologize about that. So in the article on the website at CheatSheetPros.com, I went over, I think, about 10 to 12 possible plays, and then we're going to probably double that in the video. So I'm going to run through these pretty quick so this video doesn't drag on and on. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with passing yard props. There's 2 that jumped out at me. Keep in mind that prize pick lines, they jump up and down like crazy. So watch them. And if you see one you like, go ahead and get it. And we'll go over a couple that I got earlier on. So Tua's passing yard prop is, well, first let's kind of take a look at what he's doing. So they're playing Atlanta. Now the fear here is they play the game in London, and typically, I don't know about this year, but last year the teams got to choose if they played a London game, they could have the bye the following week for jet lag and tiredness. Miami chose not to do that. So they're coming back from London, so they're probably going to be jet lagged and tired. And on top of that, they're playing Atlanta, who's coming off of a bye, so they're going to be well rested. So the one thing that did jump out here is Atlanta's defense is not that good. And down here you can see they're 29th versus wide receiver 1s, 29th versus wide receiver 2s, 23rd versus wide receiver 3s. So they're just not that good at pass coverage. Their passing defense down here, you can see overall they're about 30th. And then what interests me about Tua is he played week 1, week 2, and then everybody knows what happens. And then he came back in week 6 against Jacksonville, and even though they only scored 20 points, he had 47 passing attempts for 329 yards. So that was pretty impressive, and it wasn't like he had an 80 or 90 long. His longest one was only 30 yards. So he had a lot of good passing attempts, and so I wanted to see what his over-under was going to be this week. So on Prize Picks, as of last night, it was only 240.5. So I think they've built in some of that jet lag, tiredness, but they are playing at home. So, and they are playing Atlanta. So 240.5 seems a little low when he had 330 last week. And I like these lines where he has a chance to go well over that. So we could get so we could get a win early on. The other one is on the other side of the ball, Matt Ryan. Now, if we look at Miami's defense over here, they're 29th in passing yards per game allowed at 292.5. They're 27th versus wide receiver 1s, 20th versus the tight end. They're not real great. They're 26th in passing defense overall. So Ryan is someone that interests me just because he's been picking it up. He started off rough with only 164 yards, but it was the first game. And then he came back against a tough Tampa team and put up 300. And then he went on the road to the Giants and only put up 243. But then these last 2 games, he had 283 and 4 touchdowns against Washington. And then he had 342 against the Jets with 2 TDs. So the 283 and the 342, it seems like he's starting to click a little bit more. Calvin Ridley's coming back. He's playing a bad pass defense against a jet lag team. So he's someone that interests me. And his number as of last night was 278.5. So I think that's fair. He's been over at the last 2 games and 3 of the last 4, and he's in a good matchup. So that's another passing yard one that jumped out at me. I typically don't play a lot of passing yard props. I like rushing and receiving yards. They didn't have a lot of receptions up yet, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at rush yards. And one of them that I talked about in the article, and this isn't one that I came up with. FTN was on SiriusXM, and I think Brad Evans was the one talking about it, is the Patrick Mahomes rush yard. So I went ahead, took a look at it, and I agree with him. I like it. So this isn't my play. It's one I'm just kind of sharing with everybody. So they said it opened at 20.5, and it went down to 16.5 on the FanDuel Sportsbook. Prize Picks had it at 18.5. Now, Tennessee has been pretty good against the QB, but we all know Kansas City's a different type of beast. You have Kelsey, you have Tyreek Hill, so they need as many people in coverage as possible. And then looking at his rush yards, he's got 31, 61, 26, and 45. So for him to go over 18.5 in a game that has a 57.5 total, I don't think that's asking too much. So Mahomes is one that I like this week. The other obvious one is Derrick Henry. Now, Kansas City, let's go ahead and take a look at them. So Derrick Henry has a prime matchup against Kansas City this week. Kansas City is giving up 27th most rush yards per game at 133.2. But what really jumps out at me is down here, this allowed yards per rush attempt. Kansas City is 30th, and they're giving up 5.2 yards per rush attempt, and they're the 31st rushing defense. So Henry's gonna have a big game regardless. But this line opened at 126.5. And so that seems astronomical. But then when I went back and looked at his stats, 143, 130, 157, 113, 182. I mean, that's just insane. So I have a better prop for Henry that we're going to get to. But if you like doing the rush yards, I don't mind it. But I think there's a better one where we can attack him. Another one is Daryl Henderson. So let's go ahead and take a look at this game. So this is Detroit at LA. Find the Rammies. All right. Okay, so Detroit right here is all you need to see. They're giving up 132.2 rush yards per game, and the Rams are a 15-point favorite. So this is a game where they could get up, call off the dogs, and then Henderson just gets a bunch of rush yards. Now, he's been doing pretty good. He has 21, 17, and 14 rush attempts in the last 3 games for 89, 82, and 78 yards. So that's pretty impressive. And his number, it was decent. It was at 80.5. So I don't love it, but I do like it as a play just because even in these games, like, you know, he got 89, 82, 78. I don't think 80 is asking too much in a good matchup where they're playing at home. And you can see here in home games, he has 30 rushing attempts. So Henderson over 80.5, I think that's a fair line, but I like it to go over. It's hard for me to vision him going under unless they just pulled him out of the game because they didn't want him to get hurt. Another one is Leonard Fournette. So his line here was 64.5, and after last week, he kind of intrigued me a little bit. So he's got 81, 67, and 92. So he's pretty much taking over the RB1 job in Tampa Bay. I mean, he had 20 rush attempts, only had 12, but it was a blowout, and then 22 here. So, I mean, he's getting over this number consistently. So each of the last 3 games, he's been over that number. Now, Chicago is a tougher animal, but Tampa Bay has a good O-line. So I think 64.5 is pretty fair. So he only needs 65 yards to hit this. He got that against Miami with only 12 attempts. And then these other games with 20 and 22 attempts, I think he's going to see somewhere around 15 to 17. So I think it's a good line, but I do like it to go over just because Tampa's starting to do a good job running the ball. And then one of my favorite ones is Alvin Kamara. Now, this one didn't jump out at me because I look at DFS first and it wasn't on the main slate, so I didn't see it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the matchup here. So Seattle right now, if you look at these numbers, they're giving up the 30th most rush yards per game at 140.8. And then I want to go back and look at allowed yards per rush attempt, 4.4. So they're giving up a chunk. It's 20th, so I'd say they're in the bottom half. Now, what's interesting about Kamara is he's got 16, 26, and 24 rush attempts. So this is a game where Winston may not have to throw a lot. Seattle's got a backup QB in there, and we could see a whole lot of Kamara and a whole lot of rushing. And with 89, 120, and then 71 yards, I like him to go over. Now, his number was 75.5. I feel like that's pretty low, especially in these games where he got, in these 2 games combined, 50 rush attempts. So that number seems low. That's one that I really like this week. I've already locked that one in. Now I want to jump over to receiving yards. Now, Cordarrelle Patterson is one that, the hybrid guy. Now, I will tell you this line is moved. So when I first ran this, his receiving yards, I didn't like his rushing yards. I can't remember what it's at. I think it was like 55, but you can see here, he doesn't get as many rush yards, but his receiving yards is just ungodly. 60, 82, 82, 58 the last 4 weeks. And his receiving yards was 36.5 when I bet it. I did check it this morning because I was going to hammer it again, and it's at 41.5. So just beware. This thing's going to bounce up and down. But I got it at 36.5, and with him almost doubling it, almost doubling it, that was one that I really liked. And look at these targets, 9, 6, 7, 7. I mean, they're using him, and he's been effective, so I like that to go over. Even at 41.5, I'm probably still going to bet it again. That's one of my favorite 3 plays on the slate. The other one I think we can look at is Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley's coming back this week after his personal leave, whatever that was. I never heard, excuse me. But when he was playing, look at this, 10 targets, 11 targets, 13 targets. I mean, he's just a target monster. Now, he hasn't really done a lot with them, but he put up 63, 61, and 80 yards, so he gives you a good floor. And his number was 70.5. So I think that's a good number because that's kind of between where he's been averaging the last 3 games. But we're coming up in a game where, well, we just saw it where Miami has a bad, excuse me, Miami has a bad pass defense, and he is their wide receiver 1, getting a ton of targets. So I think 70.5 is a good number. Another one, actually, I've got a lot in that game. Another one is Gesicki. So Gesicki, and I've got a better way to attack him. But if you like his receiving yards over, I don't mind it. I mean, he's coming off of a game where Tua came back. He had 115 receiving yards, 8 of 9. That's solid production. And his number's only 49.5. So he was under it here and then over and then over. So he's been over it in 3 of 4. But the main thing I wanted to see is how often does Tua target Gesicki? And it looked pretty good at 115. So 49.5 is a good one. I don't mind that. And then one I'm going back to the well with is DJ Moore. So DJ Moore just had an awful game. I mean, he dropped so many balls. It was frustrating. He had 13 targets. Look at this, 13, 7, 12, 12, 11. He's getting a ton of targets, but he had so many drops. I was camping with my family last week. We came back. We dropped the camper off. And everything I saw was just him dropping the ball. It was brutal. But he only caught 5 of 13, but those 5 he caught was good for 73 yards. And his number is 75.5. So when he had 126 here, 113 here, 73 here, he's really close to that number, and he could sky over it in this game against the Giants. In this game, he only had 5 of 7 for 42 yards. Excuse me. But the other 3, I mean, he's been over that. And if you throw out that game and every game, he's been right around that number, 73 or more. So he's someone I'm going to go back to just because I like him. It's not something that jumps out on the cheat sheet or anything or looks amazing, but just one I personally like. Another one is Shepard. Everybody is banged up for the Giants. We all know Saquon is likely not going to play this week. He played week 1, 2, 3, and then he was out 4 and 5, and then he came back week 6, and they did not bother easing him into the action. He had caught 10 balls on 14 targets for 76 yards, and he's probably going to get another heavy workload again this week, and his over-under receiving yard prop is only 59.5. So in a game where they're likely going to have to throw a lot, and Carolina's been torched the last couple of games, I can't remember FTN on SiriusXM. Evans was talking about it. I was in and out of the car, so I got glimpses of it, but the corner that's going to be on Shepard's giving up a QBR of like 140. So he said Shepard he really liked this week for DFS, and so I started looking at his price prop, and 59.5, we only need 60 yards. I don't mind that. He had 113 against Denver, 94 against Washington. Didn't really do much in this game, and then had 76. So he's been over it in 3 of 4. So that's another one that kind of jumped out at me that I liked. And then another one, Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown has secretly been the top receiver the last couple weeks. When you're looking at Tampa Bay and stacking Brady, you're always looking at Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, AB, or Gronk if he's in there. But we know Gronk's out. And Antonio Brown's the one that's kind of jumped out at me. And here I actually got it pulled up. I can show it to you. So Tampa Bay, so when we come down here, so this is our fantasy points tracker, so you can see each week kind of who pops, who does what. And then you can see here Antonio Brown. So out of Mike Evans, Godwin, and Brown, he was the top receiver last week at 24.3 points. The prior week, he eclipsed Evans, which Evans got all his production in the fourth quarter. At the end of the game, he had 34.4, and then he was only 1.2 points away from being the top receiver in week 4. So after having a big game, couple down games, he's been doing really well. So he's someone that I wanted to look at. Now, he was questionable, so watch his let me see what his pass yards are. Okay. So he was questionable for an ankle sprain, which you can see right here. So just make sure he is in the lineup if you do play him. But his receiving yard prop was 69.5. And I mean, he's been killing that. So 93, 124. He had 121 in week 1. In week 4, he only had 63, but he was still in the 60s. He was close to that number. So I like that in a game against Chicago where they're probably going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. But again, he's questionable, so that one does come with some risk. Another one I want to look at is Debo Samuel. So let me pull this up. So at San Fran is here. So the one thing with Indianapolis that jumps out at me here is rushing defense, passing defense. So they have one of the top rushing defenses and the 29th passing defense. So looking at how this game could play out, San Fran's probably not going to be able to run the ball a lot or very effective. Indianapolis is giving up a low 4.1 yards per carry. They have the number 1 DVOA rush attempt. But pass defense, they're 29th. And you can see they're 21st, 32nd, 22nd, 27th versus pass catchers. So San Francisco is going to have to go to the air here. And I like Debo Samuel. He's the clear wide receiver 1, and his targets have been solid. 9, 13, 10, 8, 12. Every game he's been in, I mean, he's 8 or more targets. So he's been solid. And then his yards, 58, 156, 52, 93, 189. So his number was 71.5, so it is a little high. But I think that is a number that he can get. He's got there in 3 of 5 games. And when he does get it, look at this, 156, 189. He could sky over that number. And he always has some real long plays. So he had a 79-yard catch here, a 76-yard catch here. So this could be a one and done. He catches one of those in the first quarter. We lock it up. We're done. We move on. And he's going to continue to get a heavy amount of targets. So he's looking at another 10 to 12 targets this week against Indy. We've got this game projected to score around 49 points. The total on is 44 to 44.5. It kind of bounces around. So I do like Debo going over here. And then, okay, so for the final ones, I'm going to go over the fantasy points, and I got 5 of them I'm going to run over, and these are some of my favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Derrick Henry. So we talked about another way to attack Derrick Henry. So his rush yards was 126.5. And, you know, he's been going over that. But some of these games, like against Jacksonville, he's been pretty close to that number. But what jumps out at me is look at his TDs here. We got 3, 3, 3. Woo, 3. So in his last 5 games, he has 3 games where he scored at least 3 touchdowns. Or 3 touchdowns exactly. So that's 18 points by itself with just the 3 TDs. Now, we looked at Kansas City. They're giving up 5.2 yards per carry. So they cannot stop Henry. If they get in the red zone and we see a heavy dose of Derrick Henry, he's getting in the end zone. So I think he is almost a lock for 2 touchdowns this week. That's 12 points. And then he only needs to come up with another 10 points. And, I mean, he can easily do that. So here he got 3 targets, 2 targets, 3 targets. The 6th we'll throw out. That was a one-off game. But 3 catches, 2 catches, 2 catches with 10, 20, and 30 yards. So we could safely say in the receiving game, as a floor, let's say he's going to get 2 catches for 15 yards. You know, that's a real low number, but that's something he's consistently been doing. So that gives him 3.5 points. His fantasy point number is 22.5. So if we give him 3.5 there, then he's only got to get to 19 points. Well, we know he's going to get 1 touchdown. So that knocks us down to we only need to make up 13 points. I think he's going to get 2 touchdowns, so that's going to knock us down to 7 points. So if you give him 100, 110 yards, a touchdown, and his catches, we're going to hit that number. If he gets 2 touchdowns, then he only needs 60, 70 yards, and we're going to get that number. I think the Derrick Henry over 22 fantasy points is one of my favorite plays. I like that with the Cordarrelle Patterson over receiving yards. Those are the first 2 that I locked in for a large bet. But the fantasy points when someone can score a touchdown is key. The other one is Daryl Williams. So last week he filled in great for CEH. He had 21 attempts but only 62 yards, but he did get in the end zone twice. And he's always involved in the passing game. He has 9 targets the last 2 weeks. Last week he was 3 of 4 for 27 yards, had 24 DK points. 23.9 if you want to be exact. His fantasy point number is only 13. So it's going up against Tennessee in a game with a 57.5 total, and he only needs to make up 13 fantasy points. I like the ability there. You know, he scored a touchdown in week 4. He scored a touchdown in week 2. I mean, if he scores a touchdown, he only needs to make up 7 points, and he's heavily involved in the passing game. I mean, if this game became a shootout and he caught 5 balls, you're pretty much there. So Daryl Williams is another one of my favorite plays that I like. And I'm probably going to stack the heck out of that game. Take like Derrick Henry fantasy points over, Daryl Williams fantasy points over, Patrick Mahomes rush yards over, and see how many I can get, and then just watch that game and hope it's a shootout. Another one is Cordarrelle Patterson. We talked about him. I like his receiving yard number the best, but if you want to go fantasy points, his number seems a little high. It's 15, but he's put up 18, 34, 16, 23. He's been over that in 4 straight games. The receiving yards I like because he could catch one, break free, get it, we're done. We don't have to worry about it. With 15, he gets close to where he needs a touchdown because he's probably going to have 40 to 50 rushing yards and then, 40 to 60 receiving yards with, 4 or 5 grabs. It's going to be real close to that number. So one of my favorite plays is Cordarrelle Patterson, receiving yards over 36.5. And I'd take it all the way up to 41.5, which is what it's at now. But if you don't like that and you think he can get in the end zone, I don't mind doing the fantasy point prop. And I got 2 more here I'm going to go over. Waddle is one that I looked at the receiving yards, but then I scratched him off because I saw Gesicki's was a lot better. So let me see if I wrote down Waddle's receiving yards. And I didn't. Sorry, I got a huge piece of scratch paper here with all kinds of arrows and lines and highlighters on it. But his receiving yards, you can see he came back really well and got targeted a lot by Tua. 10 of 13 for 70 yards. I can't remember what his receiving yards is. It's somewhere around 60 to 70, I believe, which I didn't mind it. But then when I looked at his fantasy points, it was only 12. Well, I prefer Gesicki at 11 because that's kind of a key number when you start projecting stats. But I don't mind Waddle if you want to stack this game going over 12. I mean, he had 29 last week. He did catch 2 TDs, so if he didn't have those 2 TDs, we take off the 12 points here, and then that's going to put us at 17, which that's going to put him over. So any guy, like, he caught 10 balls last week, so you get a point per reception on Prize Picks, and his over-under fantasy number is 12. So he would only need 20 yards to get that number. And you can see here in week 3 against Vegas, he caught 12 balls. So now he didn't do much here, but again, he didn't have Tua. So now that Tua's back, targeting 13 times, he caught 10 balls. His depth of target was only 7 yards, so they're highly catchable passes. I mean, 12 seems like a slap in the face number, so I really like that. So those are the Prize Picks that I like. So one of my favorite cards that I'm going to do is Derrick Henry fantasy points over 22 with Cordarrelle Patterson receiving yards over. I got 36.5. It is 41.5. If you want to crank that card up, I also like Mahomes rush yards over. I like Kamara rush yards over. I like Shepard, Antonio Brown, and Gesicki receiving yards over with Debo Samuel. And then fantasy points, I like Daryl Williams, Gesicki, and Waddle are some of my favorite ones. I don't mind a Tua pass yards over. I think if you went Tua pass yards over and then paired Waddle and Gesicki fantasy points over, that would be a good one that would correlate and give you a 3, but you need another one in there. So throw in Derrick Henry fantasy points over 22, and then that gives you a game stack with a stud and a prime matchup. So anyways, I will have the link in the description of this video for our free Facebook group. Feel free to join it. We have a free group and a premium group. Our premium group is dirt cheap. It's $14 a month or $35 for 3 months, and we post every sport. I hate the sites that charge you $29.99 for each sport, and you got to pick which one you want. Any sport we do, we add, we do it all. So right now we're posting golf, football, and basketball will be up in the next day or two. I needed every team to play one game so I could start pulling in the data tables, which I'm going to do this afternoon. But then we'll be back in the action with the NBA. So anyways, good luck, guys. If I see some more picks, I'll post them on Twitter. So follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the channel, rock and roll. Let's get ready for the next video.